Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining this live event again. Today we discuss about views and procedures and how to call them using Spring Data JPA. You will in real world applications at some point have to use views because they simplify a lot the way you will write some syntaxes for some SQL queries. I'm definitely sure you will at some point use procedures as well. So these two represent very important practical topics in our, say, JPA umbrella that we try to cover in the playlist you'll find on this channel and in the past videos that I've created. So thank you very much for being here with me. If you have questions or anything you'd like to share with us, you have the live chat. You can always use the live chat, and if you see the event recorded, then you can still use the comment section, or you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and we can discuss there as well. With that being said, I just want to share my screen and start a couple of examples we will create together today. So very practical. I actually have a database here from a previous example. It's a very simple one. I will show you what's all about. You can see I only have the database, it's called demo, and then we have a product table with a couple of columns and 2 records in it. So very simple, nothing special about it. No views, no stored procedures for the moment, so that's what we try to demonstrate. So first thing I'd like to do is create a view, the simplest view I can create. Remember that in real world applications we use views when we aggregate data from multiple tables, usually at a lot of conditions, and then you want to be able to query on that query. So in order to avoid putting the large query in the application, you can create a view in the database and then query on the already existing view. That's a very common practice. It's nothing special about that. You can always hide some part of the selection if it's complex and minimize the code on the application side by putting it on a view. I will not write a complex view. I will actually write the simplest one. So how do I do that? I have to run a query, create view, and we can name it demo product view, whatever, and then you have to literally define the query that represents the view, and I will define the simplest query ever. It's just select everything from product. So this is my view. It's a view that maps precisely the product table. It's something you will never do in a real world application because it doesn't make sense, but we don't want complexity now because we are not discussing views. Now we are discussing about how to query views from Spring Data JPA. So we will just run this query, and it looks to have successfully created my view, and then I should be able to refresh here and see the view. So you can see it, and you can even query it like a normal table. And of course, being that's a view that selects everything from the product table, then it's just going to show the same thing as it would show in case you would directly query the table. But remember, a view usually is a more complex query on more tables with a lot of conditions and so on. So that's the usefulness of the views. So that's our very simplistic view. It's only for demonstration purposes. Fortunately, to give you the good news is that you already know how to query a view from Spring Data JPA and from any kind of JPA implementation. Either if you use or not Spring Data, it's irrelevant, because when you query a view at the database level, you can see that the queries are identical. Of course, you cannot insert into a view because the view is only a reporting tool. Is not like a table. But from the selection point of view, you can just write select something from, and you can use the same select syntax with whatever you want: join, union, group by, having, whatever you would like. Just treat it as a normal table. And because you can treat the view as a normal table, guess what? You can do the same thing also from the Spring Data JPA or from the JPA implementation you use. Again, whether you use or not Spring Data JPA is irrelevant. In this example, I will use Spring Data JPA, but again, it's not relevant at all. For the information you learn is that you can literally treat any view in your database as an entity, and Hibernate or whatever JPA implementation you will use will know how to handle that. So you will know how to query that, and we can demonstrate it. So I will definitely create a new project. Let me see what I need. So how do we call it? So do we call it JPA view and procedure? Java 17, latest long-term supported, and I will just create a very simple, for the demonstration purposes, web application. I use MySQL, so let me add the MySQL driver, and I promise to use Spring Data JPA. And if I want to avoid writing getters and setters, maybe we can make a good use of Lombok. So that's basically it. And now I can create the new project. I'll wait a bit for everything to be indexed. Hopefully that will be fast enough where I can also quit the other project that I don't need. Okay, and then of course what I want to do is create an endpoint and expose that content of the product table, but not directly on the product table, but through that view we just created together. So that's what we want to do. So how do we do that? Very like for any other JPA application where we use tables, for example, you can just create the entities. And what was the name of our view? Demo product view. Fine enough. Let's call our class, in that case, demo product view. So new class demo product view. And I'm going to literally treat this as for any other normal table. So I'm just going to say entity, and then I'm going to say table, and at the name of the table I will use the name of the view, which is product demo product view, which is this view you have here. And then you still have to have an identifier, which again you decide upon it, very similar to how you do it with a table. Or in my case it's very simple because it's clear which is the identifier. It will be the ID from the table, but remember that in a real world application a view might be on multiple tables, and then it might be a little bit more difficult to find the unique column, and you might have a combination of columns. And if you have a combination of columns, then you have to use a composed primary key. I will not show you how to do that in this video, because if you want to learn how to use a composed primary key, I already have in the JPA and Hibernate playlist demonstration on the two ways in which you can define composed primary keys with JPA. So in case you need to refresher on that, just rewatch those videos in the JPA Hibernate playlist. Again, for this example, it's very easy for me because I have the ID and I don't need a composed primary key. But in a real world application, you might need a composed primary key because the view might not have only one identifier, and if it doesn't have, then you have to find a combination of columns that uniquely identify every record, because that's what a primary key is. And remember that you need to do that because you can't avoid having an ID with JPA entity. So if I comment this out, you will see that my IntelliJ will tell me that it's a must. Having a primary key, it's a must. Okay, you either have to inherit it from a map superclass, or you have to define it in the class, but you can't avoid having an ID. It can be a simple or composed ID, but you still need it. Okay, and okay, getters and setters, let me use the Lombok annotations for that. And that's it. And now I create a repository. Which will be a simple interface, demo product view repository, which of course will extend from the JPA repository, and I will use the demo product view entity and the type of the primary key. And that's it. So now you can query, you can define your own queries here like you do on a normal repository. You can use the functions you directly inherit from the JPA repository contract. So we will prove this by creating a controller. Okay, and then say controllers, and then you have demo controller, rest controller, private final. Usually you shouldn't inject a repository direct into a controller. You should have the service layer in between in a normal application, but let me save some time by doing this now. And let's say that we return a list of the demo product view. Okay, but again, you can have any method, any custom method, any query you'd like. What you can't have is modifying operations. You cannot change the view. And I see a question from Christian here. Just the question, is there a risk of accidentally modifying the underlying view, let's say for example by editing the entity inside the transaction? No, there is no risk on that, because if you really do that, it will fail at the end of the transaction. So if you try, just go directly to your workbench and try to insert in a view. It will not work. You can't insert or update a view. So what will happen is that when you will try that from the application, the Hibernate might and will potentially create the update query, but then it will fail with an exception on the database level. So you can't do that. And /demo should be good for us. And then I can start it and prove what happens when calling the endpoint from a postman. And another question, do we have any advantages for going for views instead of a table? Well, the advantages of the views themselves. Sometimes you have a large query and the view will not be on one table. It will be a complex query, potentially on a lot of tables with a lot of conditions, and that's why we use views, isn't it? We use views because it saves us from putting that huge query in the database, in the application directly. We have it like an object in the database, and we directly query that one. And of course I forgot to add the application properties, so let me do that. So data source URL JDBC MySQL localhost demo was the name of the database, and the data source username root, and I don't have a password locally, so that's fine. Never do that in a real world app. Of course, never even keep credentials directly in the application properties in a real world app. We should always use a vault for that. And let's see how it goes. So, okay, everything started fine now. 11 seconds, a lot of them. I'm still looking forward for the Spring Native. HTTP demo, I think, was our endpoint, and just send a query. And I think we had a couple of products now, so we can see exactly what you see when you query the view. So when I say select here from the view, exactly what you see here, you can see that indeed the endpoint triggered it. So it's very easy. It's really easy. A view from the Hibernates, from the JPA's implementation point of view, it's only like a table. Of course, you will not be able to modify data in a view, because a view it's only a reporting object, so it's not possible to change something in a view. So in case you try to do that, you will end up with an exception, and you will probably observe that easy. And again, why do we use views? Because sometimes we have complex reporting queries and we want to hide them somehow, and we hide them as an object, so that for the application it looks like the complex query, it's only a table. It's not a table, we know it's a view, we know it's just the aggregation of some data, but it helps us keep the application cleaner in many cases. So that's how you use a view. Now the second subject, so I told you this one was very easy because it's something you already know. You didn't learn anything either other than just the fact that for Hibernate, a view and the table look similar. So now you know that, you can use that in your applications, but I didn't need a lot of time to prove you and to teach you that. Now I will need a little bit of more time to show you how to call a store procedure, even though it's not something complex. Actually, Spring Data JPA makes it really easy. You will only need an annotation for that. I will have to define the store procedure, make it do something hopefully, and then try to do it. So I can actually, let's see if I can do it directly from my script. So let's just create a very simple procedure. What should it do? What's the simplest thing a procedure can do to prove that it works? Like add something in the product table. So let's say we want to add something in the product table. So I'm going to say create procedure, add product, why not? And then just have a parameter for the name of the product. We can do that. So how do I say here, name, and I think this was a varchar of I don't remember, but I think it was a varchar of 45. Let's try like this, because that's the default, and I probably didn't change it. Okay, and then what should we do in this procedure is, oh, not an alter but an insert into product values, null for the ID, name for the name, and that's it. So that's the simplest procedure. Okay, a very simple one. And if I hopefully didn't make any mistake, I'm not sure, did it do anything? Oh, sorry about that. No, it didn't. Okay, let's try another SQL file. Sometimes bugs happen here. Oh, this is really interesting. So it doesn't do literally anything. Fine enough. We will try to do it this way then. Create store procedure. And I think then the delimiter is out of the box probably. and then I apply it like this, and it creates the delimiter. Fine. Okay, that's good. Okay, we have the procedure, doesn't matter, so that's it. And we want to call this add product procedure from our application. So how do we do that? Well, the only thing you need to do is find the repository. Now the question sometimes is, which repository should I actually use? Because procedures sometimes are not necessarily linked to one or another, and technically speaking you can use any repository, but what I try to do is I try to link that procedure to at least one of the most essential entities it uses. So for example, if I had here a product repository, I would put that call of the procedure, because it's add product, I would put it in the product repository. It creates a bit of an uncertainty, because you can see the procedure is logic, which should stay where? In the service layer, not in the repository. But remember that sometimes we use procedures because we need to move some operations directly at the database level, and there are cases where that can be really useful for the performance of your application, especially when we need something to happen quick, and we don't want to have like multiple queries exchange between the application and the database, or even a lot of data fetched and processed. We need to somehow shift the logic and allow the database to process that through a procedure. But you see, that's why it doesn't feel okay. Something doesn't feel okay. The fact that you put it here in a repository, whichever that repository is, it doesn't feel right, because you can feel that the procedure is business logic, which should stay at the service layer. But yeah, that's how it works. So the idea is try to choose a repository that's the most appropriate, but technically speaking you can use any repository. So I can simply just say, void add product string name, and then I will use the add procedure, and then I'm just say add product here, and that's it. That's now going to the controller to try to create post mapping. Let's say that we take the name of the product we had from here. That would be a path variable. And then you call, say, product repository add product name. So something like that. And let's just restart and call the endpoint in Postman. Let's give it some time, a few seconds to start. And once it's up and running, we use, so what was product, I think, slash biscuits. And then we send it, and it's a post, sorry for that, not a get. And it says 200 okay, but what we want to make sure is that if I'm going here to the product table, the biscuits ended up here, so fine. It's pretty cool, exactly what we expected. So we saw that the add product actually procedure was very easily executed. So if I want to alter this procedure, and what we can do as well, and one of the things you find in real world applications, because now I just call the procedure, I assumed it doesn't return anything, but there are cases where you also want to return something, so that's why you can use an output parameter for. So let's also figure out not only how to call the procedure, fine, we saw that, it looks good, but also how to get something out of the procedure. So that means I should actually change this procedure somehow. Let's say this is an in, and then create an out parameter, and I don't think it's really important what this parameter is, so let's just assume we have a boolean that we want to return. And what was the syntax? Select true into status, something like that, and apply. And hopefully this has been applied successfully. And that means I need to change the code as well. So that if you look into the procedure annotation, so that will be the value now, but then you will need to specify which is the output parameter name, which is in status in our case, and then we need to change the return type of the method to what exactly matches the output parameter, and then just return it, because that should be enough to prove us it's working fine. So again, let's give it a few seconds for the application to restart, and then we try to call again the endpoint and see if we get something from the procedure. Cool, here it is. So I will keep biscuits, I don't think it matters. And you can see what's back. So we can see that indeed the value that the procedure returned ended up as being the response body of our response. And of course, if we query again the table, we should have 2 biscuits records, which is fine, is what we expected. And if you don't believe me, I can even make it now. So it was true, we can make it false to see that after we make it false. So apply it. I only need to make the change at the database level. Since I only changed the value, I shouldn't need to restart the application. So I will keep the application up and running, and then I will just click on the send button again, and now it's false, because that's what we return from the procedure. And again, of course, we should see that another record biscuits has been added to the table. Cool, and that's basically it. So you learned how to use views, and you learned how to call procedures as well, with or without an output parameters. So pretty easy, isn't it? You can now do that in your projects. And again, views are very useful in real-world applications, sometimes to hide some queries behind the scenes, and procedures are very useful when you need to enhance the performance of some processing. Although, keep that in mind, I don't really recommend you to use procedures a lot. So when you think about putting some logic at the database level, my recommendation stays as first of all, think about it twice, because moving the logic at the database level, if you move too much logic at the database level, you might end up in the end with less easy to maintain applications. So you will always find the logic at the database level less easy to maintain, and the more you have there, the more difficult it will be to maintain. Not to say that the testing of the logic at the database level is also much more difficult to do than if you have it on the application side. So just be careful with that. But again, procedures are not evil, they are needed sometimes and useful. And then you also need to how to use subselect of Hibernate for views is the same as for tables. So Nabel, I just recommend you go to the fundamentals, the JPA and Hibernate fundamentals playlist on this channel, and you will find out how to create subselects as well there. So again, nothing special, just parentheses and the query there. Cool. Cool. Guys, with that being said, I think I ended up what I wanted to show you today. Thank you very much for being here with me. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson as well. And see you soon for another lesson. Until then, have an excellent time for learning further, and I'm waving goodbye. Cheers, everyone.